Oh, hello there, and welcome back to the Red River Horror Podcast. I am your host, Joe Zakreski. This is episode number 58. Very soon you will hear an interview that Eddie and I did with Vincent Lee Grayson and Lillian Yves, who narrated the anthology book, Do You Fear Like We Do? Rock and Roll Nightmares, 70s Edition Short Stories. Some really interesting stuff. We had a great conversation with these two. But before we get into it, remember to check out our sponsor, Keystone Retro. You can go to KeystoneRetro.com, find all of your favorite collectibles, especially, you hear me this, if you're into the wrestling thing. So he's got a bunch of good stuff over at KeystoneRetro.com. You use code REDRIVER for 10% off your order. Now let's sit back and relax and get ready to travel down those channels of fear. Yay!
Welcome, guys.
Hey,
Thank you so much. We're glad to be here.
So,
all right. So I was just taking a look at the book real quick. I'm going to read the description on Amazon because kind of sets the tone for.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's pretty cool. It's like, do you feel like we do? Take a chill pill, get ready to catch boogie fever, and turn it up to 11. Do You Fear Like We Do is set in an alternate, scary 70s where Disco Inferno isn't just a song title. An FM radio DJ who works the graveyard shift finds out what catch you on the flip side really means, and a rock band faces death flying the not-so-friendly skies.
Ooh.
Stories include Tiny Danger, Comfortably Dumb, and While My Guitar Gently Reaps. It's 11 stories by Stacey Lane Wilson, Kurt Lambert, Leanne Rowe, Graydon Schlickler, Joel, David, Amos, Ruth Ann is at Jag, and Dr. Oolong seemingly.
Ooh, Dr. Oolong.
Those. So pretty.
Is that a T?
It is. It is. That's, I don't know if it's the tea bags that wrote it, but
Okay.
probably personal.
Right. So we have guests, so I would like to ask some questions.
Yeah, fire away.
That's all right. All right.
Absolutely.
Hit us.
All right. So, Vincent, you are one of the narrators,
That's right.
but also one of the authors as well.
Oh, that's true. Actually, if I take off my glasses Clark Kent style, then I become the writer, Graydon Schlichter,
Oh, okay.
who wrote She's a Killer, Dean, for the anthology.
Cool.
So you guys may have picked up on this already. Every story title in the anthology is riffing on a song from the period.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I was not expecting, just Do You Fear Like We Do is the book we're talking about. That's the one, we would encourage people to go out and buy, but also listen to. That's what I've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
What's crazy to me already, if you're into rock and roll, this is totally where you go. It's crazy to me just how many references, how many bands, how many songs, how many different things. I totally was not expecting that going into it. I will be honest. But yes, I did notice that now.
Well, happy to give you a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, that's fun. What got you guys into being a part of like this project, or like what inspired you for your stories?
Well, those are two separate questions.
They are.
I'll start with what inspired the story.
There you go.
There you go.
That's
I also, if I put on my glasses to go backwards, I have my other persona, Leanne Rowe, which is yes, and I wrote the story Comfortably Dumb. So when Stacey first approached me about this, I don't think she knew I had a decade's worth of experience working in logistics for band merchandise. There's a lot of really big bands, and a lot of times when they would come to LA, we didn't have the merch people to go and do it, and they would come to me, and I love free concerts. So I would go and set up and sell merch at these concerts here and there, and I really wanted to tell a story from the merch girl's perspective, because some crazy stuff happens when you're at these. And some of the actual true stories are in the story that I wrote about this merch girl who is given, at the very beginning, I won't give anything away because you won't know what they do.
Okay.
She's given scratch and sniff stickers to hand out for the encore. And then what they do, I'll wait, I won't tell. But it was inspired by, I was doing a Scorpion show, and I believe the guitarist or the drummer gave me postcards for a coffee that he had started, like a brand. And people just went nuts with this free merchandise that was just like promoting coffee. And they were coming up and crying and begging for more postcards. And I was like, all right, so let's do something with scratch and sniff stickers.
So, attack for free stuff.
So just to reset here, we're talking about the book Rock and Roll Nightmares 70s edition. Do You Fear Like We Do? It was edited by our friend Stacey Lane Wilson. On with us, we have Vincent Lee Grayson, Lillian Yves, the two narrators, but they also just gave their personas their author names as well. Comfortably Dumb is the one you wrote. So now you just opened up a whole new world as far as this merch goes. I had no plans on talking of band merch.
Yeah, I was for over 10 years. And it was pretty, I don't know if we get to name drop. It was some pretty big bands.
Absolutely. Name dropping is awesome.
I entered into this whole field working for Bon Jovi. And then it opened up and we eventually had over 58 different bands. And they just kept coming in. Like we also had Jeff Dunham for a while and Britney Spears. I was absolutely ecstatic when we got Ben Folds for a while because I was this major Ben Folds fan. So I was like, free concerts. That was a dream. But, it was just merchandise. Like really crazy stories come out of that people don't even really think about. Like when we had Jeff Dunham dolls that had a pull tab so they wouldn't talk. But when you would get hundreds of orders and be filling up UPS trucks, you would just hear all of these dolls just talking inside of these containers. And it was like a little bit of a nightmare going on. So yeah, I was with that for a good long time until it kind of went away.
Yeah.
Merchandising. Where the real money from the bands is made.
It's true.
You have a lot more friends when you have like access to concerts and merchandise and Christmas comes and like, can't you get me maybe this shirt, or do you have Heaven and Hell necklaces of this, so
yeah.
It was a really rad time. Yeah.
Now I know.
Nice to revisit that and then watch in the story that I wrote, watch the concert goers kind of go through this kind of experience. So
I like it. I'm looking forward to reading that one. That sounds like fun.
Yeah, and on the side note, she talks about in the story having seen the Hollywood Vampires. I don't know if you know them. They came back, and they were big in the 70s. They came back around in the like the early 2000s, and I got to vend some of their concerts as well.
They were a super group.
Yeah, they were a super group. It was like Pink Floyd would come together, Alice Cooper, Joe Perry, and when they reformed the second time, it was Johnny Depp was there, and Joe Perry was back, and Alice Cooper, and then they had like special guest stars like Marilyn Manson came out at some point. So I had 2 nights where I was vending the concerts, and I just couldn't believe I was getting paid to be there the whole time. Yeah, I actually think the original group had Ringo and John Lennon would pop up from time to time too. Yeah.
Not to make a correction, but in the book, I was listening to one of the stories I heard they referenced Alice Cooper as a band. I thought Alice Cooper was a guy. Which is it?
I know which story. I think actually she says the character asks like Alice Cooper, and she's like, "Who's she?" And he's like, "Alice Cooper is a band." Or I think that's what they did. Yeah. So.
Okay.
So you're right, it is a band, but the character in the story, one of the characters in the story gets it wrong because she's so young that it's just not in her life experience.
Poser.
I haven't whipped that one out in a while.
I did not write that one. I'm just going to put that down.
No, sorry. I like to think about it just like how, like, we talk about horror movies and so, but just how scary it must have been working some of those merch stands with like some, like those big bands have some extreme fans.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I will say
if you don't have the right size or the right piece, like.
Oh, well, the heavy metal bands were really good about buying you drinks.
I'm sure.
Nice.
I would get a lot of drinks to see if I could get people backstage. But like, no.
So you didn't have that.
No, some of them I did, but I said I didn't. And some of them I didn't. And you would get, they were really nice, really nice. It was the actual bands. I think we had Ollie Murs for a while. He was kind of this teen sensation out of England. That was the scariest one I ever did because it was 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds just screaming and crying and like throwing money at you. And then you would get 50-year-old women screaming and crying and begging to get backstage, which was really creepy. So I was more concerned at those kind of concerts than I was like heavy metal.
Yeah.
Well, so Vincent, I definitely want to get into some of the process and some of your previous experience because we had spoken a lot beforehand before this interview started. But I just wanted to use this opportunity to tell a crazy story that both Joe and I were a part of. And one of those crazy fans was me.
Oh, God.
Oh, no.
Now, being 35, I am no longer really starstruck anymore. I don't really I'm not that excited about things like if it's like, oh, okay, yeah, great, this band's coming in. But I used to be way over the top. And my favorite band back starting at 12 years old was the Backstreet Boys. So just to get through this story quickly. So they came back after the whole pop thing ended. Justin Timberlake went solo on NSYNC. So NSYNC was no longer. Britney was kind of trying to reform herself. The Backstreet Boys were on a quote hiatus. So they released an album in 2005, and with that, they wanted to do like a big world tour back in like the days where they were flying over the crowd and these huge productions. But before that, they did a warm-up tour, like a small venue. So ours was at the Electric Factory, and I was such a big fan that the night after that, they played at this place in Scranton, PA. Mm-hmm. At the Scranton show, there was, for some reason, access to like the back area where they were going to be getting on their bus. And so I found my way there, and Joe went with me. He said, if he goes with me to the Backstreet Boys, then I had to go with him to Nine Inch Nails. So it was,
nice.
It ended up being a great trade-off. So I'm in the back of this place in Scranton, and Joe's just like, oh boy, like what the hell is going on? So they're all making the rounds, they're slapping hands, but nobody came over to me. Except Nick Carter. He was the only one that made like the rounds. So I'm screaming at Nick. I'm just like, Nick.
It's hard to explain because your face is just beet red, screaming his name with like a pen and something for him to sign. And this man, he's just stopped in his tracks and just like locked eyes with you for about like 5 seconds and just bolted.
Yes.
With their bus, car, whatever it was to leave.
So here's this dude in the sea of girls just screaming with a beet red face. So anyway, long story short, so I didn't, he was like really like, so like, okay, dude. So a couple months later when they released the album, I went to New York to meet them and he remembered me. He's just like, dude, I'm like, hey, what's up? He's like, have you calmed down? I'm like, yeah, no, I've calmed down. So it was just funny, like thinking of like back then I would have done anything. Just like, oh my God, I just want to hang out with the Backstreet Boys, which is really weird. And I know as an aside to this, so sorry to hijack the time there.
No, it's all good because I was actually thinking about that earlier today, but not that part of it.
Oh,
our drive back.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
That's like one of those things. If I was ever going to write like a short story, that's probably something that I would include because we ended up. This was before GPS, so we didn't have like a GPS or a map. We didn't print out a map, and so we were just driving. So Scranton to Philly is about 2.5 hour drive. Give it, maybe 2 hours, 2.5, but whatever. We couldn't find the highway, so we ended up taking this local route and just driving through these old coal towns and stuff like that. So I was like, oh man, that would make for a great story of just like getting stuck in some coal town.
Yes.
I mean, it's basically Silent Hill, but
yeah, But anyway, so Vincent, so we were chatting just a bit beforehand and you happened to be, well, you got your start in radio. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Oh, cool.
Oh, sure. Yeah. When I was a kid, I grew up in a small town, and I somehow booked a radio commercial at the age of 16, and it was this car dealership. It was a 2 dealership operation. They had one on the east side of town, one on the west side of town, and they were opening one on the east side of town. And the director of production at our local radio station had been doing commercials for this dealership for years, and he had this sort of gruff cowboy character that he would do, this sort of by gum, come on down, et cetera, et cetera. When they opened the one on the east side of town, they wanted to set up a rivalry between the 2 dealerships. And so I don't remember how I got on their radar, but somebody put me in front of this guy to do an English accent. And so the thought was that the dealership on the eastern side of town was a bit further east, if you will, across the pond, sort of a posh sort of environment, if you will. And that was it. So we went into the radio station and we recorded the copy. It was a series of, 5 spots, I think, something like that. And then after we finished, the guy turned to me and he said, "Do you want a job?" And I said, "A what?" And he said, "A job. Would you want to be a DJ? You got a great voice. You're articulate. You seem like you got a good head on your shoulders. How do you feel about doing nights on the weekends, overnights?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. That sounds great. What does it pay?" He said, "Well, normally we start our DJs off, our part-timers off at $4.25 an hour."
Wow.
Now, that right there gives you a little bit of insight both into how small the town was and also how far back in time we're going. And then he looked at me and he said, "But, you're way ahead of the game already, so I'm going to start you at 5.
Ooh.
5.
Oh. It beats flipping burgers, though, doesn't it?
Hardly believe it sure does. Well, and the overnight shift is 6 hours. So I was making $30 a shift. Boom. And, living at home, room and board was all covered.
Yeah.
That was just crazy money. Just making it rain.
But then that brought you out to L.A., Joe, the reason I brought it up is that town happened to be in Pennsylvania.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Because you said Bethlehem and just a few minutes ago. So you're originally from Lehigh Valley?
Yeah, that was only a reference, though. I actually grew up in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And at the radio station in question, I don't actually know what the format is these days, but it used to be 95.1 Mix 95, bringing you the best mix of the 70s, the 80s, and today. Damian Quinn here, bringing you the tunes all night long. That was Elton John, and before that, we had a little Madonna. We'll have more coming up after the break. Stay tuned.
Nice. Wow, so the 90s. Okay, so that question for both of you. So we are in the 70s edition. Do you feel like we do? We're talking about bands, songs, the times it's all happening in the 70s, the cars. They're talking about dropping the needle, 8-track players, everything. Is that your preferred? I guess what's your preferred decade of music? First of all, we'll start with you, Lillian.
That is so hard. For rock music, I love the 70s, actually. I just really like Pink Floyd, Three Dog Night, ELO, like when the Beatles in the 70s. I really jammed a lot of that. The Eagles. But I went to school for musical theater.
And, oh my gosh.
I was obsessed with music written in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Unfortunately, I'm like a walking dictionary to the poor narrating partner over here. I will go on long tirades about Gershwin and like Cole Porter and Jerome Kern. So I love standards. I really love that kind of music era. But I also love 70s music. And, I really like a whole bunch of music. So yeah.
Pick a decade.
Yeah, which decade?
That's my whole point. And musical theater. I love musical theater too. That's big fan of that.
So 5,000, 25,600.
Oh, Rent?
What the hell? Yeah, what the hell?
Yeah, no, I'm not. I like a lot of the musical theater right before we started doing all of the movies.
Okay.
I liked like Ragtime and William Fenn is one of my favorite composers, and Cy Coleman. So yeah, I get kind of geeky, but yeah.
Well, is there anything that you obviously it's hard to use the same instruments and not create a sound that's heard before, but I guess what do you think the most obvious version then of a song that exists that you like, that you kind of get geeky about from that like 20s, 30s side of it, that's either happened in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 00s, and today? Like what would be a good example of a song based off of something from that time?
Oh, from the 40s?
The 40s.
Yeah.
I've got to think on this. We just had a really big discussion last night about the song Blue Moon, because he was saying it was doo-wop, and I was like, no, that was a 40s song. It's Rodgers and Hart, actually. Before Rodgers and Hammerstein. This is my little tirades I go on. But I really don't know. I would have to think on that. Unless I talk about it so much.
Nope. I'm not going to help on this one.
Well, okay. Don McLean's song "Vincent."
Okay.
That inspired "Killing Me Softly." I always think Vincent is such an absolutely fantastic song. I know he locked himself in a room with a whole bunch of Van Gogh's work, and I know a bunch of the titles of the poems are in the lines. And then when you hit "Killing Me Softly," it captures what it was to hear Vincent. And so I'm not really answering your question, but I'm it inspired this.
No, I love the Fugees version of that song. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no,
I love
it's
that
all the way around. Yeah.
All right, Vincent, your favorite decade of music.
Oh, that's easy. Easy. No question. Easily done. The 80s.
The 80s?
Child of the 80s, man. Yeah. Take on Me from Aha. All of, classic Michael Jackson from Thriller on down for the next 5 to 8 years when it was all still pretty solid stuff. Just 80s, 80s, 80s. Let me think. Dexy's Midnight Runners. Jesse's Girl. You guys remember the song Jesse's Girl?
Yeah, some Rick Springfield,
Yeah, little Rick Springfield. It's just 80s all the way up and all the way down, which doesn't mean I can't appreciate other decades, other genres. I do. I love music, but
now,
80s.
Did you hear Jesse's Girl Part 2?
What?
This was one of the oddest thing to come out of the pandemic. So it's the band Coheed and Cambria, if you ever heard of them. So Coheed and Cambria, featuring Rick Springfield, did a Jesse's Girl 2. And it makes no sense. It doesn't sound like Jesse's Girl, but it's just Rick Springfield's in it and in the music video. And it's okay. Here's a thing.
Wow.
True story.
Hey, you know what? Creation, right?
Absolutely.
Creation in the face of adversity.
Yes, absolutely. Why not?
But have you heard, I'm sure you have. Have you heard Blinding Lights by The Weeknd?
Oh, I'm 80% certain that the answer to that is yes.
So for me, that song, I'm a huge Weeknd fan. He's one of the only newer artists that I think is actually interesting and good. It sounds like you could mix it perfectly with Take On Me by Aha. You can mix it perfectly.
Yeah, it's the same beat.
Nice.
Yeah. It's like it's perfect. I don't know.
Love a good mashup.
Nice.
All right. So now that we're through that, so was there so for the stories that you wrote, so Vincent, I'll start with you. For the story that you wrote in this book specifically, then obviously this is the decade from the 70s. Where did you kind of have to research the period at all before you started on something like that? Or did you just kind of say, you know what, I can write a story and then put it in that time?
Great question. So my process started a step before that, which was when Stacy was talking about this project to us separately and together. She gave us the pitch, which was horror comedy in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, riffing on song titles. And so I immediately, back in the napkin, 3, 4, 5 story titles that were riffs on song titles that had a slug line, just so that I could start to get the creative juices flowing. What story am I going to tell? And then I pitched 3 of them to Stacy. 2 of them, ironically, riffing on the same title. That's a story that hasn't been written yet, so I won't spoil it.
Okay.
But she loved all 3 of them, and she said, "Yeah, it sounds great. You can write whatever you want. This sounds fantastic." So then I had my title, right? She's a killer dean riffing on Killer Queen. And then I thought I knew what the story was, and so I sat down to start writing it. And I'm a blocks sort of writer, so I'll sit down and I'll write a block of text. If there's something missing, like a detail, I'll make a note. And in the case of the 70s, the first thing that I really researched was fashion, because there's this female character who shows up early in the story, and she's super important. And I wanted the audience to be able to picture her perfectly, like she had just stepped out off a 70s TV screen or out of a 70s print ad. So I just Googled 70s fashion and found some images that spoke to me, and I just sort of put together her outfit, and then I wrote her outfit. And that was the only other piece of it that I really had to do, which ironically did not make it into the final story at all, was I spent a little bit of time researching genre evolution in the 70s, because the original concept for the story was that it was going to take place over the course of most of the decade as the band sort of evolved, adding members, changing art forms, losing members, et cetera, because the 70s, of course, has a really rich tapestry of musical genres. And so I did that research, and then the whole story winds up taking place over the course of an evening anyway. So all right, so none of that. There's a little bit of that research that survives where it talks about what the band was before that night and how they got to be where they are, but then it doesn't progress beyond that because the action is condensed to that evening.
Okay. I picked up on some of that. What's been interesting to me so far, listening through the entirety, like of the book, which you guys narrate so well, is
thank you.
That it really does. It makes you think, like, because when you're younger, right? Like Joe, I mean, we've talked about music and like the music that we love so much, especially in the, I don't want to say top 40, but in the contemporary realm, like stuff that makes the charts. There's you can't fathom that your favorite artist who's like let's say Slipknot, you don't think that like, oh, Corey Taylor's going to be in a rap song. Just like those two things don't mix. You know what I mean? So one thing about this story, or I guess this group of stories so far that I've picked up on, is you have a producer that like he's in the disco spot right now.
Okay.
But he's really like a rock and roll guy. But he's just there. Like, he's just like, okay, like, I know I can produce a disco record. So, like, I know what you're saying is what I mean. Like, I'm very enamored with that side of it because I've never been on that side of it. So I think of something like Rick Rubin, I guess, would be a perfect example. Launches the Beastie Boys, makes this just magic with their records, and then all of a sudden is working with Tom Petty or
Slayer.
Exactly.
Really jumping around.
So
yeah, those are three very different genres.
Yeah.
It's crazy, but this, it's funny. Like, I can tell the passion for the music in these stories because all of those elements, those layers are there.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it because, like, as we started, I was like, oh, I got to remember to download this. So I just added it to my Audibles. And then, so it'll be my background sounds while I'm, doing work on my new home. But yeah, so I'm like, oh, this will be fun. But so, like, we're talking like music and scary stuff. One of the things for me, this is in my head before I forget it, because like, I asked all three of you because like we're getting in, like, one of my favorite things in whether it's TV or movies is always the music for the horror genre. And it's like, you have the classic scores with the synthesizers, but one of my favorite things is the one that just cuts the tension right in half and is funny. So like, imagine it's like, there's all this creepy stuff. What's the song that you would throw into something that would like, change the vibe and just be hilarious? So for example, it's like the one that gets me every time is Richard Cheese's Down with the Sickness. Have you ever heard his lounge style singing?
Oh, yes.
So in Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, it's like, there's all this chaos going on, and then you just hear this, get up, come on, get down.
Right.
Like something like that. So I always thought that, like, something, it popped in my head when we mentioned ELO. I was just like, I always thought it'd be funny if there was like something great, like some kind of like zombie chase, and then Mr. Blue Sky starts playing like,
that would be great.
Yeah, you're right.
I would think if you guys know who Spike Jonze is,
not
the director, but the guy in the music, like back in the 30s, 40s.
No.
He was the inspiration of Woody Allen. I mean, and I'm messing it up. Weird Al. He would sing a song perfectly in orchestra, and then they would break it down, like how Weird Al does it now. In fact, if you've seen the movie UFO or
UHF.
They brought in an original member of Spike Jonze, isn't that? But if you haven't seen him, look him up. He's hilarious.
Spike Jonze still left for Merry Melodies, right? And they do a lot with the Looney Tunes.
Yeah, they did. They did the really famous one where Donald Duck dreams that he's in Germany. I think that whole score was done by Spike Jones. But they also, if you were to do the Ink Spots, if you know them, they do the song that I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire. It's really famous from the Fallout games.
Oh my gosh, yes!
Wonderful souls. I think that they're so gorgeous, and if something horrible is happening, and then you just get this really beautiful ballad. Because they always have the guy that comes in and then speaks the lyrics afterwards, where he's like, I don't want to set the world on fire, darling, And I just think that kind of, it's such a weird break if it was something in the middle of like a horror.
Something like
zombie apocalypse, eating brains.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Oh my gosh, I haven't. That was on the Fallout commercial back in the day.
Yeah, and if you download the radio station, those are all of the songs of my era. So I was like, I just did nothing but listen to the radio station. They had like Danny Kaye and the Ink Spots and Billie Holiday. It's fantastic.
So Joe,
I could go on forever. Go ahead and answer the question.
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
Play.
So I've got two because I can never decide. For the purity, the pure answer probably, although this is also weirdly riffing on Fallout, is Country Roads. Right?
Oh,
you can just imagine like barreling through a blasted apocalyptic wasteland with Country Roads, take me home. So there's that. But then for pure comedic value, I don't think it exists, but I want it to, and that would be like a surfer rock adaptation of Enter Sandman.
Oh,
you know what? That would sound really funny and kind of cool because, like, if you just like tremolo pick the whole intro,
exactly.
Yeah.
Worth noting, Stacy's dad is freaking Don Wilson from The Ventures.
Yeah, the guy.
I don't know if they invented that sound, but
Wipeout.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, it's funny you bring that up. Like, that's the person who put the book all together. One of our favorite people of all time, Stacey Lynn Wilson. It's like her dad, like, is from that era, like, created that.
The surf sound.
Yeah.
That tone.
Pretty freaking cool.
Yeah.
But
no, that's interesting now. I'm gonna have to
like that.
See somebody be like, let's see what we could do with that Enter Sandman riff.
I would love to hear it.
Yeah.
I would crank that all day.
All right, Lillian, did you answer yet?
Yep. She went with Spike Jones.
Okay, Spike Jones, yeah. Which is awesome. Like,
what about you? Because like, here's the if it wouldn't get taken down immediately, I would like start a channel like cut of like the run. It's like the kid, like the Michael Myers or the Jason where he's just walking and the girl's just running, and it just like keeps catching up to him, but just having like Bon Jovi's Runaway in there. Dun, 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 dun.
That's good. I like because
get taken down immediately, but it'd be funny.
Because you know me. Just as I've gotten older, I've gotten so much ready for this English. So much less creative. I was going to say. So I think like I don't want to say the opposite, but in Donnie Darko, when there's a version of Mad World, that song, when kind of like when you get to that moment in the film and that's playing, it's not funny. It's really not funny, but it's very impactful.
Yeah.
So I'd have to have longer to think about that. Like what would be funny? Like a funny hit.
We get on that music topic and we could just go.
That's true
for several hours. but
well, I guess
cool.
Speaking to some of the process of narrating audiobooks, so. The reason it was so interesting to me, Stacy literally just asked, she's like, hey, I know you guys are rolling along with the podcast. You're over a year in, got this project and wanted to know if you wanted to talk to the narrators of the story. I'm like, well, that's very interesting because something we've been trying to do at redriverhorror.com for a long time now is like, we call it the channels of fear. It's the different channels, a little play on words. So movies, right? Movies have been a huge part of it, obviously. But we haven't really ventured fully into books yet. And we haven't really ventured into what's called the audio streams. And that's...
Yeah, so that's part of like a grand scheme where it's like I'd like to start producing more fiction podcasts where it's like, we'll have like our fun one with our interviews and other things, but like actually producing like a show of something that's all audio you know.
But it's all the different streams.
And all the, yeah,
like all the like podcasts, audiobooks, that like fiction, like reading, telling stories.
Yeah. It's just so much fun.
So that's why I'm really excited, and I wanted to get to kind of some of the process of how this is done. Now, I've listened to a good portion of the book thus far, and I've heard it both ways. So I've listened to a Stephen King book on Audible, and there's just one narrator doing all of the voices, no sounds interjected. With Do You Fear Like We Do, the 70s edition, the Rock and Roll Nightmares, there is both of you speaking, and also there are voices, there's effects, there's kind of things that creep their way into the story. So how do you decide what books that you narrate? Like, how do you decide what is going to get that treatment and what's just going to get the straight, like, I'm doing multiple characters?
Well, it's an interesting question because so Lillian and I have our audiobook journeys that brought us to this point in time were a little bit different. And so we brought different experiences, different expectations, and different maybe biases in how the process works. And so the first thing that I would say to that is that, we've learned a lot from each other.
Okay.
And the work that we create now is very much an alchemy. It's a melding of the different skill sets that we bring to the table in order to create something that, if I may be so bold, is better than anything either of us have or would have produced on our own.
What? No, I completely agree, actually.
And the sound effects question is a particularly salient one for us because when we started working together, I think it's fair to say you were rather dramatically opposed.
I was.
Which is not a criticism. That was your experience and where you came from.
Yeah, I didn't want anything to take the listener out of listening. And, as you know, with horror films, you don't think about the sound until it's done horribly. And then you're like, oh,
that's a good point.
So yeah. I just wanted to make sure. I knew if I was to put effects into an audiobook, it was not going to be very good because I didn't know how to do that. So when he started talking about effects, it's like, I don't know what I feel about this. But we were working on a paranormal romance. And there's whispers and wind and spirits and all of these things. And he's like, let me just try. And I was like, no. and it sounded amazing. And it didn't take me out of that. And then we had to cross our fingers and wait for the author to listen to it.
Spoiler, and she loved it.
She loved it so much. She rewrote the beginning of her book with the page recommending that everybody listens to the audiobook because she'd never, to quote her, had heard anything like it.
Wow.
So I was wrong not wanting the effects in the very beginning. I've since then changed my ways, and I sometimes go overboard. I'm like, you could do this, or you could add this sound. And he's like, calm down.
But I will say at the same time that your instincts were always 100% right, which is sound effects, music, layering voices, all of that stuff needs to support the story. It needs to push the narrative. If I'm doing any of that just because I think it sounds cool, then I'm elevating myself as the narrator above the story, and that it's not gonna work. That's not the goal. So when you listen to Do You Fear Like We Do, it's a great example because horror lends itself a little bit more towards some of this because the atmospherics are so important. But at the same time, it's easy to go too far. So if you look at this book, for example, I don't know exactly how far you in, whether you've heard Hotel Kill 'Em For You yet.
I did hear that one. Yep.
Yeah.
So that is far and away the most complicated audio production in the work. Because
really?
Just a little bit of a split. Yeah. Because it's less of a story and more of an advertisement in the way that Stacy wrote it. Right? Mm-hmm. It's less of a narrative fiction and more like almost like a radio commercial. And so when we read it, instantly we thought, okay, this is the piece where we can go a little bit farther with some of those elements because it's there's less risk of taking away from the work. It's going to be fun, and also it's pretty quick, so it doesn't wear out its welcome. By contrast, or another great example actually is the first story. So if you start at the beginning, you've heard Saturday Fright Fever.
Yes. Yep.
So without giving away what it is to the listeners, there's a particular character whose voice is very modulated in that story. You know the one that I mean, coming over the loudspeakers.
Right.
So that is a very thick, chunky effect. That is more than I would typically do in a story, but the story itself called it out so directly, and that was so on point with what was happening in the narrative that it made sense to incorporate it. That having been said, there will be some people out there who, if they heard it, they would hate it. This is sound effects and layered voices and things in audiobooks is incredibly divisive amongst narrators and amongst audiobook listeners. In fact, there is at least one review of one of our books that someone said, "I don't know how I feel about having two narrators." As if having the two of us working together was not the experience this listener wanted. And I'm not going to make fun of them for it. Whatever the experience that they want to have is the experience that they should be seeking. But for us, it's a no-brainer that when we can work together to create something, share the cast of roles, share the narrative responsibilities, and also share the creative and artistic evaluation of the work, what comes out is just better.
Yeah, and predominantly with me coming from romance, a lot of reviews I was getting, besides the people who are just mean for being mean,
right.
asking like, why doesn't she have a male narrator? Like, it's kind of a new thing entering the romance world, but because I don't like voicing guys. Like, it's pretty evident I'm not a guy. Right. And then people would get mad at me because I didn't sound like a guy. And now it's all so much better. Just not have to worry about it. So yeah.
That's cool. So is that, I guess a question, one that I'm curious about, because it's funny you bring up paranormal romance. I did do a paranormal romance book, like 4 years ago or 5 years ago, but that like was an entree to a few more. Like one of the authors heard my version of that other author's and said, "Hey, I would love for you to do my book." I'm like, "Really? Okay." So I'm like, "Mom, do not listen to this." She's like, "Oh, I want to like get the book." I'm like, "No, you really don't at all." But but it was just my voice, and what I found was it was taking me forever to actually perform it and then edit it. Yeah. So how long does it take you for a finished hour of work to create? Like you voice it, you cut it, you do the effects, so 1 hour, how long does that take you?
There's a little bit of flexibility in the numbers. But what I will say, and you can chime in if I get these numbers wrong. To record an hour is going to be somewhere between 125% and 200%, right? So it's going to be somewhere between 75 minutes and 2 hours to record. Mm-hmm. That's because when we record, we're both in the room together, eyes on the text. And so if there's a mistake, most of the time we catch it right in the moment and just record a new take right in the moment. And also sometimes one of us will ask the other for an alternate take. Right. Yeah. Of either a bit of dialogue or, just to smooth out some pacing in the narration. So we get a lot out of our raw recording, but sometimes it takes as much as twice as long as the finished raw will be. And then there's an editing pass. Usually we do this a couple of different ways. But the editing pass is going to take somewhere between 2 and 3 times as long as the audio. So if you start with 1 hour and it takes 2 hours for you to record it, it's probably going to take 4 or 5 hours to go through that 2 hours of audio to get your cut of what you really it's good soup to nuts, with the qualifier that there might be a few pickups. There might be there's a word wrong here, there's a mispronunciation that we didn't catch in the room, or you know what, that character's voice it's not consistent with the way we've been voicing it, so we need to do another take of that line. But pickups generally run pretty quickly now. So if you're talking about a finished hour of audio, there might be, a dozen, 15 things that we surgically pick up in the studio. So that might take another half hour. dropping those in might take another 30 or 40 minutes. And then the piece de resistance, if you will, one of the things that Lillian brings to the table, one of her value adds, is there's nobody in the business who creates a better, more consistent underbed ambient sound to support the audiobook. So you will not hear a click or a pop or a squeak or anything else between the words, because she makes sure all of that is gone. So when you're listening to it, you're just getting what you're supposed to get. You're just getting what we intended you to hear. No moss.
That's a very nice way of saying I'm picky.
These will be the smoothest sounds you will hear.
Yeah.
I am so terrified of the silence, of noises coming in the silence is where you get to hear the studio. So I never want people to actually know the recording environment, even though we actually have a studio and it's taken out a lot of those, but I don't want them to go, that's a chair squeak, or I heard this. I don't know why.
Or the parrots. Oh, Lord, the parrots.
I am obsessed with people. And now that I know this and I'm putting this out there, somebody somewhere is going to leave a review going, I heard a chair squeak. And then I'm just going to go insane. But, yeah. So I'm picky in that way. But it's all right. Thank you. That was a very nice thing to say.
Of course. It's a good thing to be picky about. It's a good thing. And
it does. It does take a long time in editing. I'll just back that up.
Yeah. So, long story short, it's probably 5 hours for each hour of finished audio, plus or minus.
I mean, that takes some discipline. That's awesome. That's where we're like,
There are two other pieces of that I will share. The first is that my very first audiobook, when I was editing it, I was so meticulous about every detail that it was probably, at the beginning of that process, I was probably pushing over 10 hours per finished hour of audio. Because it was my first book, and I didn't know what to let go of then, and what was crucial and what wasn't. So in the beginning, the process is enormously long, or it's enormously short. Some people, when they first start, because they don't hear the imperfections right away, they record it and they listen to the edit one time and they think, oh, that's good, and they just put it out into the world. So it's very quick. But that usually most people who start, it's one or the other. It's either incredibly long or incredibly quick, depending upon which way they're sort of biased. And then as I've continued to do it, obviously I've gotten faster. Even in that book, I had after about the third chapter, I think, I said, okay, you know what? I can't edit an entire book at this rate. I have got to let some things go. There were two things. What was the other thing? One was that it changes over time. And nope, it's gone. There's another piece it'll come roaring back in at some point, and then we'll stop the presses.
What I'm curious,
mistakes you make when you start. I actually started doing audiobooks because I decided to narrate a book that I had written. It was a paranormal romance, and
there's a theme.
Yeah, I have a type, I guess. But as I was going to murder whoever was going to narrate this book because the lead character was so close to me. And I was like, well, then I do it. So I recorded it. I put it out there. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have the good headphones, about the cheapest thing I could find. So when I actually got better headphones and started listening to the first book, I was like, oh, you hear some stuff in the background, don't you? Which is probably why I am so picky. But I would say the narration was quicker. I didn't think that there should be emotion in the narrative. And then I started seeing reviews, some people being like, I wish there's a bit more. And so you just kind of learn as the flow goes and all of that. But yeah, so that's where I entered. So where you were going slow and very picky, I was like, I have to share this so fast. But it still took 2 months to get that book out. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's what I was curious. Now that we're talking about this, I was like, where does your creative process begin before you start? We talk about the recording process, but where do you say it's just this is what this character is going to sound like? You have some description, I guess, from the stories, but where the two of you are sitting there, do you bounce voices back and forth kind of, and make sure you have the right tempo? do you know what sound effects that you really want to use, like when you're reading, or does it not come until after you've like laid down your first read?
So that's a great question. The answer to almost all of it is a combination of actor instincts. Lillian and I are both stage actors by trade and practice. Me for over 30 years and you for almost 30 years.
Yeah.
So we have between us hundreds, or actually probably thousands of hours of rehearsal and performance experience in creating characters, sometimes creating a well-known character like the baker's wife from Into the Woods, or sometimes originating a character that no one has ever seen before because it's a brand new work, and sometimes hybrids of those. So one piece of the answer is when we're doing it, we open our mouths and sounds come out, and a lot of times it's spot on right out of the gate, but also sometimes it isn't. Sometimes we will narrate an entire chapter with characters in it who, and we'll get to the end, and I'll look at Lillian or she'll look at me, and one of us will say, I'm not sure that was that character's voice. And then we stop and we workshop it a little bit. And sometimes it happens much more quickly than that. Sometimes this has happened a lot. I'll deliver a line and then Lillian will continue with the narration only for me to go, hang on a second. That was not that character. I know that's not that character. Give me a second. And we'll just workshop it. We'll play it out in real time, which is always fun to go back to the recording. We don't stop the tape for that. All that is comedy gold. As far as the sound effects types of things, because obviously we can't. that is mostly my bailiwick. That's a word, right?
I knocked on a box once, and we used it for a door knocking, and that's about the most special effects I've done. So you hear that? That was me.
Yeah. But oftentimes it's as we're reading it, I will snap my fingers and say, "Wait a minute, here." We may want to do something, and I will describe it again. The tape is running. I'll describe it into the audio so that when the chapter comes back to us, whichever one of us is dealing with it first, that memo, it's basically a voice memo, is right there. So whatever ideas we have in the studio are preserved so that when we come back around to the next step of the production cycle, we haven't lost that or forgotten about it, which is important because at any given time, we might have 5 or 10 books in various stages of production. Either things that we're recording, things that we're editing, things that we're mastering, things that we're in a dialogue with the author about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a lot to keep track of.
We also are inspired by the things that we watch. Like if you go back to Saturday Night Fever, I believe it's the blonde girl, the girl that's not from New York, so the non-New York accent in one.
So don't name drop it though.
I'm not.
Okay.
I don't name drop what?
The character inspiration, the voice alike.
Oh, I gave us. I can't say a slight nod to what I was going for. Why?
Because you don't want to put that thought in folks' heads. You want to let them discover it.
Okay. Well, I've been watching something that's very popular right now, and I decided to give a slight shout out to that character. But then we were watching. Can I name drop those shows?
Oh goodness. Yeah, but you just don't link it to any of the actual work.
No. We had been watching Doom Patrol, and some of these little characters that pop up in all these different stories we've been doing have these slight nods to people we've been listening to. We never try to copy or imitate. It's just always nice.
Yeah, it's oftentimes it's not even done on purpose. It's almost a discovery where we'll be voicing a character and we'll get a couple of lines of dialogue out and realize, oh, wait a second, that sounds a little bit like. And then it's just sort of that thought process. A voice that I have not used, I don't think, in anything, at least not for 5 or 10 years. But I was in my old recording studio working on a book, and I started to talk, and I wound up doing a pitch perfect version of Kevin Conroy's Batman, which, frankly, first of all, Kevin Conroy's Batman is the definitive Batman. But it just kind of came out of me, and I went, wait a minute. I can do Kevin Conroy? Where did that come from?
Is Mark Hamill then the definitive Joker?
Absolutely.
I think everyone would say that, yeah.
On question. His Joker is so definitive that he steals from himself all the time. he did a video game the first or second time that he quit doing the Joker. He did a video game called Darksiders, which is this post-apocalyptic angels and demons, four horsemen of the apocalypse kind of video game. It's a great game. And he played the sidekick character to the protagonist. And it is very clearly heavily inspired by his Joker voice. maybe blended with his Cobra Commander voice. Mm-hmm. But he's great. Voice actors steal from themselves all the time because we have the same instrument for our entire lives. And so you develop tricks and things, and you go back to things and you pull them forward, and then you shape them slightly differently, or you shave off the edges of one, or you blend two things together. But Mark Hamill's Joker will forever be the definitive Joker.
Yeah. Very few people are like H. John Benjamin, who just is the voice.
Yeah,
he doesn't have to do anything. He is that one voice, and it's perfect for everything he does. That's Bob's Burgers, Archer.
Oh, that's just his voice.
Yeah, that's just how he talks.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good for him.
But he's also the blank void in John Oliver's Last Week Tonight.
Yeah.
For the past half season or whatever.
The can of vegetables in a Wet Hot American Summer.
Yeah. That's just him. I'll tell you though, I had watched seasons of Archer before I ever saw the guy. So the first time I laid eyes on the actor, I was like, look at that. That is not at all what I was picturing. I mean, It's fine, but that, because for me, it was so iconically Sterling Archer. He does not look like Sterling Archer. Okay.
Not in the slightest.
Yeah, he's got his own thing going on.
Very much more Bob than Archer.
Well, what about that? Then did not to go crazy off course here now that we're down the rabbit hole, but what about Ving Rhames with the We Have the Meats? Like, I can see that now, but you had to tell me that it was just like, Arby's, we have the meats.
I think he's like going a little deeper when he's doing the commercial.
Yeah.
Like it's a different projection than he would in like a movie or something.
Okay.
There might be some bass boost on it or a little low frequency reverb or something.
But it's just like, now I can't unhear it. But the first time you told me that, I'm like, that's not Ving Rhames. Like, I love Ving Rhames. I would know if that was him. It's like, no, it is. Like, he's the Arby's guy.
He's going deep.
Yeah.
We have the meats.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Never been, but hey.
Right.
Ving Rhames does the commercials.
Well, to put you guys on the spot, so your favorite stories in Do You Fear Like We Do? So you have to just literally name one. It can be your own. That's fine. You know, like I've done elections before. I vote for myself.
Sure.
But so yes, your favorite stories each.
Can I go first?
No, because you're going to take mine.
Okay, then go first. I'll go. I have a backup. Go ahead.
All right. Actually, I am conflicted.
I'm not going to take the one you think I'm going to take.
Okay, fair enough. Well, okay, well then you can go first.
Okay. I like the story, Do You Think I'm Stabby?
Oh.
Yes.
Do you think
It
I'm
is,
stabby?
it's very quick. I think it's, 8-9 minutes?
The audio is pretty quick.
What's great is in the narrative, you kind of hear the girl who's slightly off emotionally, but when she talks, she's trying to manipulate the people around her, so she sounds very daft, very blonde, very much like, hi, it's honey, like that kind of a feel. And I liked that you're getting the honest person in the narrative, but every time she's speaking, you're kind of seeing what she's actually projecting to these other people around her. And it was just so slightly off hinge and so much fun because it just kind of went down this kind of weird rabbit hole and had like dark humor at certain points. I don't want to give anything away, but I just kind of did like this, being like, well, she could remember this, but she did remember this part of it, kind of a thing. So, yeah. So, yeah, I very much like, Do You Think I'm Stabby? I would have said my own, but that would have been not cool.
So, just to show you how well we know each other and how similarly our thought processes are, you totally stole mine. That's exactly what I was thinking. It was. Yeah. Do you think I'm stabby?
I thought you were going to talk about...
We're gonna.
It's all right. I can pivot.
Let's do this. So before you give yours, we're gonna put this on here real quick, just so I can find out who wrote it. So here we go.
Do You Think I'm Stabby by Stacey Lane Wilson.
Oh!
collection.
All right. So Stacy wrote that one. All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, no, it is fantastic. The reason I said I was conflicted was because I am also super proud of mine. I really truly am.
Yeah.
But it's hard for me to say that it's my favorite because I for the most part knew what was happening aside from the 2 dramatic rewrites from version to version. So maybe I didn't, but I can honestly, I think I can honestly say, and I did super enjoy Do You Think I'm Stabby? But I think the most fun that I had in the whole collection was Hotel Kill 'Em For You.
I'm floored. I'm floored.
So Hotel Kill 'Em For You, Joe, just a treat that awaits you. I actually had to go back because I didn't realize. I'm like, wait, shoot, did my phone disconnect? Did it revert to the radio? You know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, oh, what the hell? Because sometimes, like,
That's a great compliment. Thank you.
Yeah,
It really has the flow.
Yeah, because I literally, I would
that's
play
cool.
it, some of it, but I can't. Obviously, it's copyright stuff. But I was literally in the car, and I'm just like, oh, okay, the story switched over, and then you get taken out of it. Somebody honks at you, or you want to, crash into someone in front of you, or whatever's going on. And I'm just like, wait, did this disconnect again? Because you never know. With your car with the Android Auto or the Bluetooth, it's just like, did this? No. And then you start listening to it, and you're like, oh, I get it. So it took me a second. I thought literally, I'm like, oh, this damn thing disconnected again. You know?
Oh, that's the best.
That's neat.
The best feedback
Isn't
ever.
But on a side note, I honestly thought that you were going to say long goal woman in a black dress.
Oh, I do really like that one too.
Because Mr. I used to be a DJ got to pull out this is my DJ voice. And you would just smile the entire time that story was going on in the studio.
I did really enjoy that one too.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've gotten to that one yet.
I have, and when we first started talking, you said you started in radio. I'm just like, well, that's his story. Then I already know, and I was wrong. So there you go.
Yep. Yeah. No, that was written by Kurt Lambert, right?
Yes, Kurt Lambert.
Our friend Kurt. So, our friend now.
Yeah.
Right.
He's cool.
Yeah, well, we didn't know him before Stacy brought this whole thing together. So,
Joe, any other questions?
That's where we started.
Well, now we're running on our time.
Yes, and our guests have been extremely generous with their time. They're probably just like, yo, dude.
Yeah.
Like, wait, you guys are out in LA?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so it's not dinner time yet, but still, I'd be pissed off if I took over an hour of your time.
No, I mean, I'm having a great time.
No, we really enjoy doing this kind of thing.
We really do. Yeah, we very much enjoy it. So,
Well,
there's no worry.
Well, let's get one more question in each then. Joe, what do you got?
Oh, man, I'm trying to think of something.
Put
now.
you on the spot.
You got something?
I do.
You go for it.
All right. So, I guess we have the 70s. This is Do You Fear Like We Do? This is the 70s edition, Rock and Roll Nightmares. Is there anything that you can tell us upcoming? Like, are you a part of the other 2 books, I should say?
Well, I can speak to this a little bit. So each book is narrated by a different person, or in our case, a team. So the 60s edition is narrated by my good friend Jennifer Knighton, who, if I can name drop a little bit,
absolutely.
Jen and I narrated 4 anthologies for Big Time Books. I don't know if you guys know Big Time Books. 3 of those 4 anthologies are also horror themed. So if you want to expand your palette, there's Hell Comes to Hollywood 1 and 2, which is all entertainment industry, Hollywood themed, sort of similar to Stacy's book City of Devils, if you know that one.
Okay, sure.
And then also 18 Wheels of Horror is right what it says on the tin. 18 horror stories that take place trucking cross country. And then the 4th one is 18 Wheels of Science Fiction. So that's a little bit different.
Yeah.
But Jennifer and I did those 4 anthologies for Eric Miller over at Big Time Books. And that was actually my entree into horror fiction in a lot of ways. Because as a kid, I had way too overactive of an imagination, and horror stuff just scared the dickens out of me. So it wasn't something that I pursued until I started doing the work. And then I discovered, actually, this is kind of fun. And then the 80s volume, I don't know the narrator personally. He's someone that Stacy has worked with before. on a prior audio project. So each volume is likely to have a slightly different feel because ours is a duet style and each of theirs is a sole narrator. So that's going to change things up a little bit. But also every narrator brings their own style to the work anyhow. So it's not necessarily that if you like one, you'll hate the others, or if you like one, you'll love the others. It's just going to be different flavors. But I can certainly speak for Jennifer because I've known her work for a decade.
Yeah, no, the reason I asked is just because if this isn't a good example, like the Do You Fear Like We Do, the Rock and Roll Nightmares 70s edition, if this isn't a good example of the industry and the radio side of it and the production side of it and the disco versus rock and roll, like the whole thing, like I'm excited to move forward. Like I'm already looking, and I shouldn't be because I like this book a lot. Like I'm already looking forward to hearing about the next decades, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely.
They should be out relatively.
Well, careful.
They should be out at some point.
What you can do during that time waiting. Stacey Lane Wilson also wrote a wonderful book called Dark Duet, which is a vampire 1970s, oddly enough. Kind of romance, rock and roll, but they're kind of feeding on people and whatnot.
A little bit of adventure.
Also have narrated.
Oh.
So we ran around in the 70s and we sucked on people's blood and talked about music. He had a British accent for a while.
Speaking of research, the research for that project was really intense.
There was a lot of accents to look up for that book.
Wow.
It was fun. You've got a girl who's got an evil twin, and she gets my kind of go-to evil twin British voice that I love to use. They always speak like this when they're evil. But
that's your warning.
That was that Jaguar commercial, right?
Yeah.
If you hear this voice, then know that it's the villain.
Yeah, because I think that was a funny Super Bowl commercial that Jaguar had a few years ago. It was all these British dudes, and I think the one I remember the most because he was like so hot at the time was Tom Hiddleston, because like he's sitting there in the jet or whatever, and he takes the sip. He's like, and we're all British, talking about all the villains. So now I just think every person that's British is the villain, just automatically.
Now you know the secret.
Yes. But okay, no, Dark Duet's something to look out for because I'm not. It's funny, like I'm in the horror space. There's obviously things I like better than others. So I'm a big I get really scared of a possession story done right. I mean, you can't get any better than The Exorcist, but there are some films that really creep me out and have good moments, like The Exorcism of Emily Rose is one. So zombies is my lowest on the horror totem pole.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say just above that, but a little bit higher up is vampires. And I was not a huge vampire fan when I was younger, so it took me a little bit longer to kind of get.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I like it's one of those things like when like vampires were at like their peak a decade ago where there was just oversaturation of vampire themed things. It's like, it's all good. I can just avoid that and still like the ones I like. But then, What We Do in the Shadows just started back up.
Right.
And it's like he's talking about British vampires and all I can hear is Matt Berry's voice in my head. It's like, I mean, that. But what make it funny? I can't get enough of that show.
But what I'm saying is, like, to kind of bring it back to your latest story is there's so much that I have yet to experience in the vampire space. So I'm looking forward to kind of growing in the vampire space a little more because this year we actually interviewed Clay Spang, the guy who played Dracula on Netflix, the BBC series, the 3-part thing.
Yeah.
And it made me like his take on it was very, very interesting to me. It was kind of like, okay, it's funny, it's vicious, it's so many things. So I might just give Dark Duets a try.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, sounds like fun to me.
Yeah. So there's not much that I can't be poisoned by what's out there already. You know what I mean? Because I already didn't have a huge interest in vampires about, I would say, a decade ago. So I'm coming into it.
Yeah. Yeah, ride that wave. I mean, we were talking about Salem. About Salem's Lot the other week. We were talking about all different fun.
That's true.
Just ride that flow.
Ride the wave, man.
Let them take a bite and just let it go.
Right.
Yeah.
How about that? Well,
at some point, go back and grab the DVDs for Forever Night. And it's a great TV show from, like 20, 25 years ago, something like that. So modern day vampire tale. But it's pretty grounded and gritty, although it might be campy by today's standards. But at the time, it was grounded and gritty for the earlier mid 80s, whenever it was. But it's funny you mentioned the arc of vampire fiction, because I was thinking about this a few years ago. For the last 30 or 40 years, there has usually been one piece of vampire fiction on TV that's sort of carrying the banner, and it sort of ebbs and flows. And then Twilight happened and exploded, and that was when everything had to be vampires all the time. And I never... Shockingly, I was never really part of the Twilight crowd. That was not my jam. So, in a way, that insulated me from the oversaturation, because I didn't care about that.
Right.
But you also, about the same time, you got the Southern
True Blood,
Southern horror series. Yeah, True Blood and the Sookie Stackhouse stuff. And I mean that had its own ebb and flow. It started out okay, and then. I got a little weird.
Yeah, it's one of those hard things when you have such a good story going. It's like you really should just bring it to an end, but you just can't. So you just keep producing more episodes. And
but I hear that's like a bunch of like naked, like
hey,
people just having sex.
There's plenty of that. It's HBO.
All right, well then.
Oh yeah.
So maybe I'll check that out. I've never watched True Blood.
Every HBO show's like that for the most part.
Yeah, right.
I feel like they still have popularity. Like typically of the 5-6 books that we're working at a time, we've normally got like a werewolf in the mix. We've got a vampire in the mix. We always have some kind of haunting or witchcraft or something. So there's a market out there for all of it.
Yeah,
for sure.
I guess you get to pick and choose what you like. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Have you ever seen John Carpenter's Vampires?
Yes, I have.
That's just freaking fun. Just people
because we can't let either of you go before asking you what your favorite horror movie is.
Correct. Yes.
The Robert Wise, The Haunting. The 1960s version of The Haunting.
Okay.
Is that one, black and white. It's one of the ones where you are freaking yourself out. Like, you don't have to see the monster. It's that scary. That one. And until the end, as a kid, I absolutely loved Event Horizon. I loved it until the very end. But I remember at the beginning, the idea that you're in space and you're on a spaceship and these people that can't be there are there. And I just remember so terrified.
Yeah.
So, and Terminator 2. The Robert Patrick as the Liquid Metal Man scared me to death as a child. He was
when I was a kid, that scared me. Yeah,
the T-1000, terrifying.
Yeah,
I met him once, and I like caught my breath because like he was the epitome of everything that terrified me as a child. But yeah, I would start with The Haunting, and then I would go.
All right, The Haunting and Event Horizon were both brought up in our last interview.
Event Horizon always comes up because it's like, sci-fi and horror are like, they come off as like two separate genres, but really, I mean, they come together like perfectly. Like Event Horizon's terrifying.
It is. I agree.
And actually there's other, there's more that was shot that's been lost. That's where there's never been a director's cut. And I think somebody that was on set has it on a VHS tape. But you can't take it from a VHS tape and make that into a director's cut. So like it was just lost to the ages. Like there were these other alternate endings and stuff. It's just, you can't get it. That really upsets me. Cause I want to know. Sorry. When I found out what Event Horizon was when I got older, I was like, oh, that movie is it was named so well. I just thought they just put two words together.
Well, it was the 90s, so they could have, that would be.
I didn't know.
Cinematic title generator. Just spin 2 wheels.
I was like, wait, who came up with this? I didn't know it was a science term. You know, I was young. I didn't really care about science. I do now.
that was her abrupt closure. Yeah. It's funny though. T2, I don't know if folks would normally think of it as a horror film, but when you have a murderous character like the T-1000 that can shapeshift and put on anybody's face and basically like approach you like your best friend and then just it definitely should be thought of as a horror film. I hadn't thought about that.
As a child, he was like the chain link fence in the backyard. He was my trampoline. I remember running into the kitchen and going up against the cabinets and then freaking out because he was either the floor or the cabinets or my mom that was coming to check on me. Like, no place was safe.
Yeah.
Absolutely none.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So that is definitely a great contender. I think the two that I would pick, one is more of a serious horror film, and that's Alien. Like, how can you not?
Yeah.
Yeah. Alien is, it's funny too, because that's a franchise where it kind of migrates, because the second one is more of an action film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's still set in the same universe, but the first one's a horror film, and the second one is an action film. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
But then I think the other one that I would have to say, because I love a good deconstruction, and that's Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah.
It's so fun. And to see, and I don't, the ending kind of falls apart a little bit on that one, but the early process of them like setting up the tropes and triggering the different things in order to effectuate what we all know are the common scenes and tropes in horror films, just, it seemed really slick and really well put together. And so it was just a fun little like, oh, and there are the pheromones, and oh, there's the thing to draw them off, and oh, there are the props, whichever prop they pick, that's going to shape the narrative with the whole control room of operators working behind the scenes. It was just a really, really fun deconstruction.
Yeah. That is a clever movie.
Yeah.
I think about the podcast I used to do before Eddie and I started this. I was lucky enough to interview Xander Berkeley. If you remember him from T2, he's the one who gets he's drinking some milk and then gets the T-1000. Yeah. So he gave us like the lowdown on all that scene. And apparently Jim, well, he refers to James Cameron as Jim. And he's just like, really made him sit in that makeup for a lot longer than he had anticipated.
Really?
Yeah. Cause he's like, oh, is it all going to be effects? And they're like, yeah, but no. It's like to make it as real as possible. So I think it's like, that took like 8 hours for that scene or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
Something very long. It was a very long day for him.
Well, actors get compensated pretty well. He's fine.
Yeah,
he 8 hours. Yeah.
Good.
Okay. All right. But anyway, okay. No, so I like it. Guys, the book is Do You Fear Like We Do? Rock and Roll Nightmares 70s edition short stories. This interview was with Vincent, Lee, Grayson, Lillian Yves, the narrators of the book. So cool because we finally got to travel down the audio streams channel of fear. I'm freaking excited about that.
Yeah, finally got to some audio.
Yes.
Some voice work. All right, and thank you for checking out our interview with Lillian Yves and Vincent Lee Grayson. This has been episode number 58 of the Red River Horror Podcast. Don't forget to check out Do You Fear Like We Do? You can find that on Amazon. You can find that on Audible. And that is, again, Do You Fear Like We Do? Rock and Roll Nightmares 70s edition short stories. And remember to keep traveling those channels of fear.